Hello and welcome to Study in Australia TV, episode on fashion in Australia. My name is Amelia.
And my name is Sam, and we'll be your hosts as we take a look back at the clothing that defined Australia's fashion over the past 90 years.
Whether you have a passion for fashion, whether you're an Instagram model, or whether you dress like an old couch, this episode will not only give you a fun look at what fashion trends Australia has seen, but also what important moments and events defined our look as a nation.
Using our time warp window, we will be looking at the fits, the folds, and the fabrics that evolved to make this great country look like it does today. And what better place to start than 1930?
So, hold on to your chair as we transport you back in time to 1930s Australia. Whoa!
Let me paint a picture of Australia in 1930. We just come out of the roaring 20s with feathers and headbands that would make Def Leppard jealous. The height of society dressed like the Great Gatsby and attended horse races to show off and flaunt their fashion. However, this age of extravagance was about to come to an end.
In 1929, the world fell into a Great Depression, meaning work became harder to find, leaving many people jobless and looking for work. For the men of the time, it became harder to keep up with the Joneses, and this was a great turning point for fashion. In the 20s, wherever you went, even if to a friend's house, you'd always put on a suit for a lovely dinner party. In the 30s, as times were harder, tuxedos and tails were replaced by knitted sweaters, and if you can believe it, soft fabric collars.
Colin McDowell writes in The Man of Fashion, Peacock Males and Perfect Gentlemen. The list of rejects from his wardrobe in the 1920s and 1930s is impressive. Formal dress boots, spats, gloves, canes, waistcoats and vests, stiff collars, except for the city suit, even white tie and tails, all were facing virtual extinction. It was also an age of cinema, and the silver screen really began to have an impact on what men wore and who they wanted to be. For example, when Clark Gable famously opened his shirt and revealed that he was not wearing an undershirt in the 1934 film It Happened One Night, the undershirt business experienced severe losses.
For the first time, blue-collar characters were being represented on the silver screen, and so too a new age of casual fashion. This is Clark Gable, in the scene that almost shut down the undershirt industry. His face even seems like he knows he's doing it.
Yep. And for the women, the flapper look, with its larger cuts and boxier designs, were replaced by slimmer cut designs, designed to accentuate the thin silhouette of the woman of the day. Satin was very popular for evening wear, and many of the articles were backless and flared out at the base. Callie Blackman, a lecturer on the history of fashion at Central St. Martin's, writes in 100 Years of Fashion, by the early 1930s, the fashionable silhouette was evolving into a slender, elongated torso with widening shoulders and a neat head with softly waved short hair. That would never suit me.
From the black and bejeweled looks of the 20s, for women in the day, patterns were now the norm. Zebra stripes and floral patterns dominated the racetrack, where Melbourne's high society still mingle to this day.
If you're an Aussie living in 1930s Melbourne and you wanted to take a dip at St Kilda Beach, just over there, the fashion was bodysuits for women and high-waisted shorts for the men.
Moving right on to the 1940s. What did women wear in the 1940s?
Well, in a nutshell, 1940s women fashion was about creating an hourglass silhouette. Think Marilyn Monroe. With masculine details like padded shoulders, nipped-in high-waist shorts, and A-line skirts that came down to the knee.
Scandalous.
This was the everyday shape of clothing, from suits to dresses. Even pants had a similar high-waisted, wide-leg shape. If a woman was not naturally an hourglass shape, the clothes were actually designed to help her achieve the look.
Very helpful.
Being put together, cheerful, and practical was the job of women during World War II. 1940s fashion accessories, such as hats, gloves, handbags, and jewelry, completed an outfit. Accessories. While natural makeup with bright red lips painted a happy face during difficult times.
Here's a list of the main 1940s fashion trends. Knee-length A-line dresses with puffed shoulders in patriotic colours. Plaid A-line skirts with white button-down blouses. Victory suits, man-tailored skirt and jackets. Wide leg, high-waisted pants.
They're very in right now.
Yeah, making a comeback. Workwear overalls and jeans created the Rosie the Riveter look. Shoes, peep-toe heels, loafers, Oxfords, and wedge sandals.
Love a wedge sandal.
So comfortable. The two-piece bikini debuted. Hats, turbans, headscarves, snoods, and flower clips topped women's heads. Lingerie, seamed stockings, socks, simple bra, girdle, slip, and panties. With the start of the war and strict rationing on fabric, dresses in the 1940s became shorter. Whereas the 1930s featured dresses that went down to mid-calf, the 1940s brought them up to knee length.
The war also affected the top of the dress. So women's clothes took on a masculine, militant look with the invention of shoulder pads. Love a good shoulder pad.
Yeah.
Every dress, blouse, or jacket was fitted with shoulder pads that extended just past the edge of the shoulder. This made for a boxy or square neckline and shoulder angle. Sleeves were often puffed up with a bit of gathering at the top and extends down to just above the elbow. The neckline of the 1940s dress came in a variety of cutouts. They could be square, slit, sweetheart, keyhole, shirt, cross front or wrap, even V, with shirtwaist or button-down tops.
So many options.
Yeah, and there was no cleavage.
Oh, okay, never mind. All dress top designs were modest, revealing very little skin compared to today's fashion. Evening dresses were the exception. They were spaghetti strapped or halter topped that revealed shoulders and chest, but only mid-cleavage.
We're getting there.
I'm getting there. Skirts were long and sleek in the early years, and full by the end of the decade. Later in the 40s, more fabric choices were available. In order to forget the depressing war, women embraced colourful patterns with contrasting trims. Fabric material was usually rayon, a newer synthetic invention. American cotton was also a favourite for house dresses.
Can't go wrong with cotton.
No, you can't. Still use it today. The material was light and airy.
Stiffer, wool-like fabrics were used on suits and workwear. Plus-size fashion in the 1940s was not something overlooked like it had been in previous decades. It's time for a bit of diversity.
Yeah.
Most women were not the ideal curvy hourglass shape. As women matured, bodies matured too, and women found themselves shopping for clothes with a different eye on fashion. Catalogues and department stores now carried stout-sized clothing lines, with dresses, tops, coats and shoes in designs that were more flattering to the fuller figure.
About time, yeah. Beauty tips and fashion advice books were full of do's and do nots for dressing a woman's best. The shortage of fabric also resulted in the popularity of the two-piece suit, also known as a victory or utility suit.
Victory!
Women could mix and match skirts, blouses, and jackets for a new outfit every day. So versatile.
Yeah. Even after the war, the suit remained popular due to its comfort and practicality. I love a good power suit.
Yeah.
Suit skirts were A-line, not pencil. This means that they flared out gradually from the hip down to the knee. Dresses from the early years didn't have any pleats or gathers because it wasted fabric. The later 40s had some pleats and a wide A shape, and even included some pockets. Teenagers were the biggest fans of skirts. They loved plaids and stripes, and full skirts making the latest fad, swing dancing, easier to move in.
Love a good swing dance. Finally, the suit jacket topped the outfit. Jackets were of the same material as the skirt, but could be mismatched if that was all you had. They had the same wide padded shoulder, high neckline, and nipped-in waist with only a slight flare at the bottom. The lower edge of the jacket came to mid-hip length. Jackets were buttoned down and featured a variety of lapel width, points, and shapes. It wasn't necessary to wear a blouse under a suit jacket, but was often more comfortable. It's all about comfort, you know?
100%.
And what about the 1945 red candy striped dress and blue bolero jacket and skirt?
Wow.
Whoa. The bolero jacket was a nice short rounded edge jacket that was worn over a blouse.
Like mine, this is a bolero.
Yeah, exactly. They rarely buttoned in front, preferring to hang open and show off the blouse, like Sam's doing at the moment. Sleeves were always long and narrow.
Blouses were the next part of the suit. They could also be worn plain or with a light cardigan sweater over them. Blouses were either a solid colour or a fun striped pattern. They could be short-sleeved, like dresses, or long sleeve with puffy gathers and tight white cuffs at the wrist.
Kind of like what I'm wearing.
Yeah. They usually buttoned down all the way and had a small V-neck or round Peter Pan collar neck opening. Pants or trousers were primarily a menswear item up until the 1940s. Women working in factories needed safe clothing that wouldn't snag in machinery. So at first, women just wore men's pants. And later, manufacturers made pants for women, although they still looked very masculine.
Still a men's world.
They were very high-waisted, button or zippered down the sides, and had full legs and wide cuffs at the bottom. They were made of cotton, denim, or wool blends. Women wore them at work, but they soon became a part of their casual wardrobe at home. It didn't take long before women were wearing pants in public, although it would take many more decades before pants were allowed at schools or professional jobs.
Overalls and coveralls were another workwear turned sportswear option. Made of blue denim or sturdy cotton, they had become a symbol of the 1940s Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah, you can do it.
Yeah. In the UK, it was the land-type girl who wore overalls and trousers while farming. Early 1940s coats were very square and usually plain. They had a few large buttons down the front, plain or cuff narrow sleeves, and a variety of necklines. They were long, often down to the knee, to keep a woman warm and covered up. Shorter box coats hung to the hip in a wide cape-like fashion with big bell sleeves.
Love bell sleeves.
Yeah, loved a couple good ones. Fur trims were still very popular like in the 30s. Fox was the best and other furs were dyed to look like fox.
For formal wear, fur stoles and capes were a must. Shoes of the 1940s lacked the elaborate detailing of the 30s and were mostly plain, sturdy, and chunky. What makes them special is not the style, but the material. Leather was needed for the war, so shoes came in velvet, mesh, reptile skin, and even all wood, also known as clogs.
Come for you.
Heels were short and thick in the early 40s, and then slightly thinner in the late 1940s. The latter shoes were called pumps, my personal favourite. The 1940s were notable for the popularisation of the wedge.
Love a good wedge.
Also a favourite. The wedge sole was all one piece, gave moderate height, and was considered safer than taller pumps. They came in solid slip-ons or fun summer sandal types. The peep toe was one common style. It was a small slit in the front of the toe. Peep toes could be seen on pumps, sandals, and wedges. The more casual style of shoes were Oxford shoes and saddle shoes. These single or two-tone shoes resembled men's shoes with a rounded toe. Slip-on loafers were an alternative to Oxfords. Super comfy. They were casual, comfortable, and all the rage with teenagers and working women. I mean, who would want to wear heels to work?
Exactly. Swimsuits came in one piece and, for the first time, two pieces.
Scandalous.
One-piece suits were tighter fitting than in the 30s and had padded bras for support and thin shoulder straps. The neckline was a V, but revealed little cleavage. A halter-top style was very popular as well. The suit bottom came on the top of the thigh in either a skirt shape or slightly loose shorts.
Like the pin-up girls.
Exactly. The two-piece suit was like the one-piece, but with the middle cut out. The pants came up high above the belly button with only about 4 inches of space between the top and the bottom. The bikini, invented in 1946, was similar in style, but tighter and lower on the waist. They were too revealing for most women's taste at the time.
My grandmother would have never worn one back in the day.
Oh, same. Beachwear called play suits were really just very short dresses that wrapped over a swimsuit. They were buttoned down, loose-fitting dresses in light cotton. There were also high-waist shorts with a swimsuit-style halter top. These were mostly worn by teens and younger single women. Mature women had play clothes as well, but they were longer and more conservative.
Headwear of the 1940s was very diverse. There were only a few new styles that became trademarks of the 1940s. The first was the beret, a one-piece round, flat, French-inspired hat that sat directly on top of the head or angled off to the side. The next hat was the turban, a piece of fabric wrapped around the head and decorated with flowers, feathers, or jewels. Small hats with flat brims with veils were another trademark style. Not exactly this, but similar. They were not practical for sun protection, merely decorative. Here we go. The ladies' fedora hat was one of the several felt hats that took inspiration from men's hat styles. Working women had to keep their hair tied back, so they wore hair snoods knits or bags that gathered hair at the back and out of the way, or scarves tied around and up. Rosie the Riveter made the hair scarf a recognisable icon of the 1940s. They were made of silk with a variety of fun hand-painted patterns.
Hair flower clips were another summer decoration for young girls, pin-ups, and women looking to dress up a party dress. Small daisy flowers or big chrysanthemums made of rayon or silk were often handmade at home. Women's 1940s hairstyles were designed to be worn under hats, as well as to be beautiful without.
Like our hair.
Exactly. The length grew out from the short 1930s waves to shoulder-length loose curls. Teens and young women wore their hair down with the sides rolled and pinned away from the face. Mature women had hair styled into victory rolls. Soft waves, big rolls, and tucks that brought the hair up into new heights while framing the face softly.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Gloves in the 1940s continued to have the gauntlet mid-arm length and shape during the war years. The elaborate trim was removed and the overall fussiness of the 1930s was replaced by plain gloves once again. Gloves were usually only worn for semi-formal occasions such as afternoon gatherings, shopping, visiting friends, or going to lunch. Colours usually matched just one accessory such as a hat or a belt. Black hat, black gloves.
Nice.
Neutral colours were preferred: black, brown, navy, tan, and white.
1940s women's jewellery played an important role during the sombre wartime. Colourful bold bead necklaces, large floral brooches, and chunky earrings added cheerfulness to otherwise plain clothing.
Are you feeling cheerful?
Oh, you know it. Patriotic themes such as V for Victory, flags, red, white, and blue gems kept women focusing on their duty. Jewellery became affordable with new plastics like bakelite and settings that required less metal.
That would make for nice light earrings.
Exactly. The classic pearl necklace never went out of style.
With a duty to work, volunteer, or manage a household by oneself, women needed a handbag that carried more than the small 1930s clutches. Day bags were inspired by military service messenger bags, with long shoulder straps that were carried over the shoulder or across the body when riding a bike. For something prettier, a large, at least 12 inches, flat envelope purse in plain black or brown leather or plastic held a woman's growing collection of beauty products. The rushed or scallop treatment on bags is an iconic style of the decade.
For the men during the 40s, men not in uniform that is, often wore suits in public. Many made do with older suits from the 1930s. Suit vests fell out of favour as an excess use of fabric. New suits were made with a wool-rayon blend instead of wool, and often with patterned, especially striped fabric. Single-breasted suits replaced double-breasted suits to preserve labour and materials.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, very handy. Suits and shirts were made with fewer pockets and narrower lapels. Trousers didn't have cuffs, though this style proved unpopular, and many men purchased a size too long and had them altered.
The baggy, colourful zoot suit, popularised by jazz culture in the 1930s, became popular with some young men. The style was baggy and less tailored, making for a bit more of a statement than what people were used to at the time. When the war ended, baggier suits and double-breasted jackets with wider lapels became popular again. Returning soldiers enjoyed the bold look fashion, suits and ties with bolder colours and louder patterns, and sports jackets in contrasting colours. A well-styled man of the 1940s fashion wore a hat, although hats became less popular among younger men after the war.
Hats were predominantly made of felt. The fedora was a popular style and was often worn on an angle. Might want to adjust that.
Yeah, there you go.
A more formal variety was the Homburg hat. In the summer, men might don a wide-brimmed straw hat in a variety of shapes, such as a fedora, pork pie, Panama, or bow tie. For active leisure, men might don a flat cap or what we might think of today as newsboy style.
Cute. Now for the 1950s fashion. The fashion of the 1950s was a return to a 1920s essence in the sense that it was lavish, but a completely different tone. Unlike the black fabrics and bejeweled 1920s, the 1950s was a patterned and colourful time. Beyond that, an important discovery happened, and it completely changed the fashion world. Polyester was now being used, and in doing so, leaving clothes uncreased and easy to look after. Fashion during this time was influenced by the Americans, movie stars, and music, especially rock and roll.
Just like now. A fashion dress during the 1950s was the halter dress. Remember the famous white dress worn by Marilyn Monroe? Designed by Travilla when she was standing over the seam drain?
Iconic.
That is the halter dress. Gloves were an essential part of a woman's outfit and were worn everywhere, with every outfit in the 1950s, and completed a woman's appearance. Without gloves, she was not properly accessorized. Clean gloves were the hallmark of a lady, and white or cream were the most favored colors. They were worn in a variety of colors, which were primarily made of cotton, as this was more affordable than leather or the newer nylon gloves. Even so, many women owned a special pair of leather gloves. Dents and Pittets were popular glove brands, but women could also make their own gloves using a pattern.
Shoes were also an important accessory.
They still are.
Women's shoes morphed into more fashionable styles in the 1950s. The stiletto heel made its first appearance in the 1950s. By the mid-50s, pointed toe shoes called winkle pickers with stiletto heels up to 5 inches were a common sight. There is no doubt that the trademark of the 50s was the stiletto-heeled shoe, first seen in 1952 at a Dior fashion show. Complete with pointed toe and metal-tipped heel, it was sometimes banned from certain places because of the damage it did to floors.
And the people that wore them.
To deal with this, many women carried around a pair of flat heels in their handbag just in case. Style as a whole was changing though. Some dresses featured fitted bodices with straps around the neck, allowing the bosom to be accentuated.
Get a bit more saucy.
Another famous dress during this time was the pencil dress. Still an iconic dress. This dress emphasized the female form with an open neck, cinched waist, and narrow hips.
For the women of the era, pencil dresses, polka dots, and printed fabrics were the look. Stockings and gloves were also common. Much of the fashion was inspired by the magazine Vogue. The looks were very colourful though. Recently, the National Gallery of Victoria held an online display of fashion from the 1950s. Australia had become quite the fashion spot after the French at the end of the 1940s.
French, always inspiring us.
Always.
1950s swimsuits for women were still fairly conservative. Most of the pictures of the women of the time, in bikinis, are of fashion models and pin-up girls. The swimsuit is not necessarily what you would have found the average woman wearing to the beach or out in public. Two-piece suits were becoming the norm, but the belly button was generally covered. No belly button piercings back then. Lower suit bottoms were hitting the market from France, and younger girls in particular were beginning to show courage in wearing them.
As for the men, fashion really took a turn. Stars like James Dean and Marlon Brando became the face of cool, with many young guys slicking their hair back and donning the leather coat. Elvis was just taking off, and with him, coiffed hair and sideburns.
Very cool.
So sexy.
The muted colours, the hats, and the suits made up the mainstream. Suits were cut fuller and more comfortable. The prevailing design inspiration was being able to take virtually any man's body type and make it look good through proper tailoring.
So important.
This style trend would last until the 2000s, when tight-fitted suits would become more popular. Men didn't have any workplace choices for colour. Dark blue, dark brown, and charcoal.
Shame.
Even the ties, traditionally men's flamboyant touch, were uniform and dark.
Some time would have to pass before men began to reclaim the flair and panache which has been historically theirs. Blue, grey, and brown were the choices. Sports coat and slacks outfits had a little more colour leeway. Dressing to go to your office job in the 50s meant that you were wearing conservative clothes. A sport coat outfit or a suit, for instance.
As a rule, the bigger your job was, the more expensive your clothes style should be. You had to look and act like the executive that your company expected. Men would also follow the rules when it came to seasonal attire, but less so than women did.
In terms of social events, you didn't have to wear a tie to a party. James Dean showed how to pull off a very cool casual-looking style and made quite a few women swoon at the same time. Yes, there were young men at school who looked just like the Fonz, but not many, and they didn't have motorcycles.
And truth be told, most girls wouldn't have gone out with them anyway.
Ouch.
The 1950s men's fashion look was often called Ivy League or preppy, and was definitely the preferred look if your date was meeting your dad for the first time.
Fair enough.
The cardigan sweater was a popular style which was used for the letter sweater, so cherished among athletes. Even if you look a lot at younger pictures of US President John F. Kennedy from the 1950s, he was wearing this preppy boy attire. Think Gossip Girl.
Yeah. When men weren't wearing jackets or suits, they were wearing sweaters or vests. Some businesses would allow the man to wear a sweater with a tie, sort of a 1950s casual Friday thing. There was some flexibility in casual wear. Cowboy looks became popular for a while, and plaid was a style that just hung on. A little bit like now, yeah.
Yeah, that's still in.
These casual looks were reserved for weekend wear only. Very strict. Influenced by the dominance of the TV Western, everybody went a little yee-haw. Although only kids wore the cook-skin caps, menswear was adapting nicely to the home-on-the-range look. Another popular style was the military look. Most men in the 50s had recently been in the military during World War II. Vests were popular because of their versatility. So many pockets.
Yeah. Lots of places to put things.
They were worn under a suit or sports coat, but could also be worn by themselves for a more casual business look.
The next fashion must for men in the 1950s was a hat. You weren't dressed for work without a hat. They had hat stores back then, so men would own several hats. Straw hats were popular for more casual outings, but would not be worn to work, and definitely not at night. Cary Grant was the George Clooney of the 1950s. So much can be learned from his style. Men of the 50s were accessorized from head to toe. Stylish hat, suit, handkerchief, coordinated tie, socks, and wingtip shoes.
Bring it back.
Now, on to the shoes. No sandals or flip-flops here. Men wore real shoes. They were expensive, and men took care of them. There were shoeshine chairs on every corner in the city, at the airports, train stations, and pretty much anywhere you were dressed for business. You also had a shoeshine kit at home to keep up with those investments.
Men didn't work all the time. In the summer, pool and beach parties were common family fun. Swimming trunks were high-waisted and very short. One final piece that completed the 1950s man was a pipe. I certainly wouldn't suggest it for today, but in the 1950s, we didn't have a clue what the health risks were. That aside, smoking a pipe was distinguished.
It was a look.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what about the 1960s look? 1960s fashion broke the social traditions of the previous decade, allowing for more freedom for people's attire.
Finally.
There was either formal or casual wear, and distinct separations as to what was for men and what was for women. The 60s brought us unisex clothing, like denim jeans.
Oh, my faves.
Yep. Modern fashion, sometimes shortened to mod, refers to the lifestyle of young people that started in London. It quickly spread to Europe, America, and Australia. Based on successful pop music, art, and fashion scenes, this new mod lifestyle was to be innovative and different. The mod fashion designs were slim-fitting with bold featured shapes and bright, wild tones, contrasting the browns, greys, and pastel colours of the 50s. I feel like we're getting into the hippie era.
Yeah, for sure. Unlike the past, fashions were being mass-produced and were affordable. One fashion item that appeared in the 60s was the miniskirt. In the past, all skirts and dresses were at least knee length, so the new short hemlines were quite the scandal. You know, the scandal for exposing more skin than had ever been publicly seen before. At the 1965 Melbourne Cup, an English model by the name of Jean Shrimpton wore a very controversial outfit. She wore a short, synthetic, white shift dress with no gloves, stockings, or a hat.
The shock,
Goodness.
the horror.
Although at that time miniskirts were frowned upon, at the end of the 60s they had become part of the usual attire.
Yep. The miniskirts were more than just a major change in fashion. They reflected the social changes and the rebellions of young people and women that were happening around in the decade. It was also used to help enforce the rights of women. They could now show as much of their bodies as they pleased.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Throughout the 60s, many celebrities had their own preferred style of fashion, styles that were copied all around the world. Even though fashion was largely influenced by young people, the icons still also influenced the fashions of the older women.
Leslie Hornby, a British teenage supermodel, was one of the fashion icons of the decade and an idol to young girls. Often known as Twiggy because of her thin figure, she was on the front page of every important fashion magazine, with her boyish haircut and willowy frame. Audrey Hepburn was also a fashion icon of the decade. Her style of flat shoes, three-quarter length pants, plain black shift dresses, and beehive hairdos were copied by women all over the world.
I wish the beehive was still a thing. I would rock it.
Another influence on fashion was Jacqueline Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's wife. She was known for her beauty and grace, as well as the elegant style of dress, such as pearl necklaces, pillbox hats, and simple big button suits.
Hippies had their own style to match their perspectives about life, like their views against the social system, Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War, and their newfound passion for the values of peace, love, and freedom. Along with their experimentation with drugs and interest in the Eastern religions, they also obtained a rebellious fashion style. Styles and fabrics were not inspired by Western countries. Instead, they were inspired by countries like India and Africa. They liked tie-dyed and paisley prints, handmade clothes and accessories, beads, fringes, bare feet or leather sandals, flowers, and peace signs that represented their views. Women and men often let their hair grow really long, and the men didn't shave.
The hippie style also influenced mainstream style. Denim jeans were inspired by the hippies and were a popular item for all throughout the decade. Bell-bottomed, tie-dyed, marbled, and painted jeans were all styles that emerged because of this. New inventive ideas for fabrics emerged during the era. Materials such as polyester, plastic, PVC, and vinyl were popular, inspired by the idea of exploring space and landing on the moon. Man-made fibers, along with natural ones, like cotton and wool, were combined to create new fabrics. And fake fur and leather was created, driven by the animal rights movement. Technology also improved, which meant that clothing items were cheaper and easier to make and buy, which meant that clothes were being tossed away more quickly. Kind of like a problem we're having at the moment.
Fast fashion.
Yeah.
The lifestyle of the youth in Australia changed during the 1960s. It was centred through British music, art, and fashion. The 1960s fashion was influenced by many popular people who had a sense of fashion which was copied all over the world. The 1960s were driven by the youth and men who were influenced by the Beatles. The Beatles had a major influence on young men and their sense of fashion and hairstyles.
We don't need the bowl cut to come back, it's fine.
The trends of fashion continuously changed, often when people saw something that was much more pleasing. The trends from the 1960s changed more frequently and affected the history of fashion, and this continued into the decade.
In terms of workplace attire, many offices expected their employees to adhere to what modern workers would consider a formal look. Companies back then were more process-oriented than the results-oriented organizations of today. Results-oriented organizations care about, well, results. According to Psychology Today, process-oriented companies are concerned with how that success occurs. As far as workplace fashion is concerned, that means that nowadays many employers are thrilled as long as you're getting your work done.
That's how it should be.
They care a little less about what you're wearing while completing said work.
Let's wear our pajamas to work.
Bring back casual Fridays.
Yep, productivity will skyrocket. Employees in the 1960s were largely expected to dress a specific way in a professional setting. Generally speaking, men sported suits, ties, and overcoats.
How dashing.
Dark suits, white shirts, dark ties, and white pocket squares didn't just dominate, they were practically a requirement in business. Over the course of the decade, men's suits morphed from looser fits to a skinnier tailored fit style, according to the historical fashion blog Vintage Dancer.
Meanwhile, career women typically wore tailored wool suits over silk blouses. Dresses were also an option for the office. The standard look was completed with hosiery or stockings, as well as shoes with thin stiletto heels.
Ouch.
Of course, while the 1960s are often remembered as a time of strict and widespread cultural conformity, not all workplaces were so exacting about dress codes. Like today, a person's age, role, place of work, and personal preferences would influence how they would dress for a job.
Fashion for men has traditionally been more conservative and less subject to change, especially when it comes to business attire. But suits did continue to slim out throughout the decade. Ties became increasingly skinny as well. Over the course of the 1960s, women's office fashion would undergo both subtle and obvious changes. Lola Cherson, who worked in advertising in the 1960s, told The Atlantic, "Back then we wore nice dresses." She added that women would constantly check to ensure that the seams in their stockings were straight.
So strict, so rigid.
Yeah. Trousers in the workplace were still rare for women, although they were increasingly popular outside of work. I love good trousers at work.
One fashion trend in particular took on special significance for career-oriented women. Pussy bow blouses were viewed as a fitting equivalent to the traditional masculine suit and tie look. As outgoing Hewlett-Packard CEO Ben Whitman told PBS, "It was our attempt to be feminine but fit into what was then a male world."
It's not a male world anymore. No.
The 1960s may have seen some major shifts, but the rollback of formality really began to snowball in the 1970s as groovy fashions took hold across the country.
The transformation was seismic, at least in some industries. Longer hair gradually became more acceptable on men, and beards became more of a thing.
So they should be.
But we'll get to that next time.
Thanks for watching today's episode. I hope you learned a lot about fashion and how it has changed over this period.
Maybe some of these looks have inspired you, but maybe you thought some of them weren't that great.
Regardless, join us next time when we take a look at fashion from the 1970s to present-day 2020s.
You'll be able to see how Australia truly came to look like it does today.
Ciao!